Hey minions, welcome to Crank It Up. I'm Jim Price, and on this episode of Faction Factory, I want to talk about the Fishermen by EisBrenner. The Fishermen are a creative faction that bait your opponents into playing on specific bases by offering incentives through their cards. Helping others to indirectly help yourself is not something we see often in Smash Up, and it's always good to see more factions making use of that game plan, especially when there is an obvious agenda behind the generosity. A faction like this needs to be split into 3 pieces. You need to incentivize others to go where you want them to, you need to reward yourself to make sure it's worth taking the risk, and you need payoff cards that punish players for falling into your trap. I think the Fishermen have a good balance of all 3 aspects. When I first saw the Fishermen, it reminded me of a reverse area control faction. Instead of penalizing players for playing on specific bases, you want them to play on others, even enticing them to do so. You can use that power and presence against them, however, and that's precisely what the Fishermen do. It's easiest to start with the baiting cards, which are represented by their smaller minions. And you need to view them as a unit, because the abilities obviously stack. This faction follows the standard distribution as well, which makes it very easy to follow along. The Recreational Fisherman allows a player to place a power counter at another base when they play on the recreational base. Power counters are always useful, but the counter goes on a minion on another base. If you were trying to win that base, you'd just play the minion there, since its innate power is likely better than the card. But there may also be an Ice Fisherman, which will grant the opponent a card. A card and a power counter may be worth it, and there are reasons to spread out on other bases. Many factions want to start smaller and diversify before they consolidate on a base, and there are times when a singularly powerful minion is beneficial. Because these abilities stack, I'd say that there is a real consideration to be made. It's not an automatic play, especially since you know it's a trap, but the card draw in particular can help you in the long run. Of course, I need to get something out of the transaction as well. The Fly Fisherman will allow the controller to shuffle a card from their discard pile back into their deck when an opponent plays there, and this allows for 2 different playstyles. It can complement the incentivized baiting base, or they can reside on a different base, providing even more incentive to play on the baiting base. Basically, it creates a unique form of having the opponent pick your poison. If you play on base A, I'll get something good. But if you play on B, you'll get something good. No, really, go play on B. You are definitely baiting someone into playing on the better base, but maybe you don't have the cards for the trap. Maybe it's a mind game to keep you off the Fly Fisherman base. This is what went through my mind when I first saw the faction, and I loved it. That incentive to avoid is at its highest with the Master Angler, who gives the controller a card and a counter. The Master Angler benefits not only from playing there, but moving there, providing a great trap for swarm-style factions. Interestingly, the ability is optional, which I think is a good thing. Sometimes comparable abilities are mandatory when you might not want them to be, since those power counters can be used towards the breakpoint. But the beauty of the Fisherman is that the players have to play somewhere, and if you can cover all bases, opponents need to think very carefully about where they will play. As I mentioned before, there needs to be a payoff for incentivizing other players on specific bases. The first double feature is Reel It In, which is a natural selection style destruction action that grants a power counter for destroying a minion. Because the other players want to reap the benefits of lower tier Fisherman minions, it's very likely that they will use their smaller minions anyway, and it highlights the importance of the Recreational Fisherman placing the counter on another base, as it means that the counter cannot be used to help prevent the destruction on the baiting base. The other double feature is New Lore, which benefits both players, but in different ways. It can grant double card draw automatically, which is typically unprecedented, and for good reason. But to compensate for this, other players get to shuffle a random minion back into their deck. This can be very powerful, but it isn't guaranteed to give you what you want, preventing it from being unfair to the controller. But if they don't break that base, then I can draw additional cards and quickly get to my best cards, which allow me to execute my own agenda. There are other trap cards as well. Prize Catch wants a minion to be particularly large, especially from counters, which the Recreational Fishermen are generous enough to provide. This card can result in gaining a VP if the minion is big enough, stealing its counters and then destroying it. Because it's harder for the non-fisherman player to play minions on both bases simultaneously, many of those recreational counters will end up going to the same minion, and if they don't, then individual minions are subject to easier destruction. To incentivize someone further, something fishy can grow quite large as it grows on every opponent's turn. If a player did not play on that base, you will gain a counter, and because this happens every turn, you cannot necessarily rely on your other opponents to stop it from going either. This combos well with Fisherman's Friend, which can grant a global power counter when they play on that minion's base. This is intentionally a play on minion action, which I'm told is thematic, but I like it as a play on minion action because it can more easily be mobile. Given that you are increasing the power of other players' minions, you want a means to overtake them in the end, which Tacklebox can provide. However, it must be set up in advance, just like Quick Setup, so opponents know it's coming. You can use this as a mole to play one last action to overtake someone, or concede on the base with the one that got away for some great card draw and a surprise power boost elsewhere. For strategic second place strategies, this can be very powerful, as someone can think that they are getting an efficient victory, when in fact, they are enabling you to do something big on your next turn. It's also very ninja base friendly. The final action is sure to be the most controversial, and it provides the greatest payoff for trapping an opponent, taking the bait. Taking the bait can be played as a reaction when an opponent plays a minion. While this may seem like Control Minion, which is particularly problematic as a card, there are a few caveats that bring it down to earth. It's not an automatic play. First, you can only play it when you have a minion of greater power on the same base. Opponents should know that risk exists before they play it. If they don't have a greater power minion, then you know it is safe, and therefore don't have to wait for a reaction. Yes, destroying the minion is harsh, or optionally shuffling it back in can be worse, but this is only one reaction card. However, the Fishermen have both the recycling and the card draw to play it again, which makes it a very real threat. Originally this was a double feature, but Adam and I discussed the implications, and I'm personally okay with it at one copy. It may seem geekish, but the geeks have several interrupt style plays, and I argue that it's the combination of them that makes them brutal and unfun. At one copy, you can survive this, unless you give the Fishermen an opportunity to regenerate it, which they are well equipped to do. It gives you further reason to avoid the Fly Fisherman, which means that you may be falling into a trap all over again. So funny story, it wasn't until Adam and I were going through the cards that I realized this Titan had a faction, and I like this faction even more after that. This is a modular Titan, as opposed to the native Titans like Penguins or Big in Japan, but it's easy enough to bring into play. A player just has to avoid all of your minions. The Titan has a very interesting nature, in that it gets stronger when opponents play elsewhere, but weaker when they play on the Titan base. But the big one can move to another base which may fit your agenda. So what do? I think this Titan, with its simple but elegant ability, captures the spirit of the faction, which I describe as making your opponents be very intentional about where they play. They have to pay attention to your cards just as much as the bases themselves, and while this could lead to analysis paralysis, if you know what the Fisherman can do, you can also predict the outcome. You just might not be able to stop it. Obviously, area control factions are going to be a natural partner. Combining the punishment of playing elsewhere with the reward of playing here can be deceptively brutal. While there are many such area control factions, I wanted to highlight the Tricksters because they rarely come up. With a card like Block the Path, you can inevitably force someone to play on a particular base. The Leprechaun functions like an automatic taking the bait, making it that much harder to keep your minions in play. Given this faction's extreme card draw, as well as their recycling, Enshrouding Mist can be very powerful and you'll have no shortage of candidates to use. I also like how this can be further bait, as you can play multiple minions to lure another player into stacked rewards, only to use that power against them and destroy them outright. I also like the idea of completely ignoring this playstyle and creating your own benefits. If you give away control of the lower tiered minions, you would be rewarding yourself for playing where you want. You could use Repaying Debts to give away an Ice Fisherman, drawing 2 cards, and playing an extra minion, which on the Ice Fisherman base would yield another card. And you can do this a lot, since you have a lot of minions that can provide benefits, and never have to worry about taking back control, because Banner Call would be an excellent tackle box action. Given all the cards you will be drawing, this will not be hard to pull off. These types of cards also combo really well with Marking Territory. If players do not play on the base, they run the risk of tripping the base easily and being left alone. This is a great base to leave Master Angler. Of course, you will be letting that base grow in power, but the Master Angler also functions like a good leader of the pack and Moon Touch target. The Werewolves have great actions for Tackle Box, including Let the Dog Out, which can allow that singularly powerful minion to shred multiple minions. The Howler specializes base finishers, which would work well with the fact that you are drawing in opposing minions and keeping the power close. Finally, the big one works well on a different base from Marking Territory because you either allow the Titan to grow or you risk tripping Marking Territory. Given the number of play-on-base actions, as well as the fact that minions will grow powerful because of the counters, Truckers have a lot of interesting plays. A double new lure can really incentivize someone to play a minion there, but it's also a lot of power for Rally and Rubber Chicken. You can also use Cab Over Pete to keep that card draw intact, changing where players now need to play in order to get the recursion they want. Since one of the primary rewards is power counters, combining this faction with the Kung Fu Fighters could be brutal. Because the power counter is optional, opponents may not want to place it, knowing you can just take it yourself. This means that they aren't getting anything for playing into your trap, and are screwed either way. Of course, you have to place your own power counters carefully to avoid making the Kung Fu Fighter talents useless, but who doesn't love the idea of playing Everybody Was Kung Fu Fighting as a Phase 3 special? The Kung Fu Fighters definitely love the card draw, and Master Angler is a very good fast as lightning target, especially when played with Tackle Box. I think the Fishermen are a very interesting engine-style faction that provides a real dilemma for opponents. They incentivize an opponent to play fast, and I do think it's possible that a player can overwhelm the Fisherman player. Not every ability scales for each minion, no pun intended, because puns are the worst, and while they have a good amount of destruction, it's really only one at a time, which helps with their balance. I think this faction would be a good addition to the game, and I like that you can keep the Titan in or out of play to adjust the balance. What do you think of the Fisherman? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, be sure to like and subscribe, let's shut it down.